And welcome to the Expert Cruise Show. This is a brand new show where we kind of hang out together. Chris and I are buddies, but we're also ship and cruise fanatics. And our love of cruising and our love of ocean liners and our love of history and future cruising is very much part of this new Expert Cruise Show. And we promise you that every week you'll get advice on the different cruise lines, the best cabins to book, which cruise line might suit you better than another one, and finding the right cruise ultimately. But most importantly, and this is where I come in, paying the right price, because I do think that the cost of cruising is getting more and more expensive, and I've done so much work to try and bring the cost down and still have the best time. So if you want to get the best deal, the best value, then we'll bring that information as well, not being overcharged and having the most fun. Ultimately, there are so many variables when booking a cruise, and I think really that's what this show is all about, as well as our own experience of actually traveling on them. So Chris, why don't you explain, because you lecture on cruise ships.
Yes.
As well as, then you also get invited to the launches and all this type of stuff.
Yeah,
so you have a slightly different perspective to me. So just tell us why you're an expert.
Well, I mean, like you, my passion for ships started as a child. It's been a lifelong passion, a lifelong, obsession, I suppose, with passenger ships and cruise ships and ocean liners and that sort of thing. So from about the age of 12, I just started consuming everything you could possibly consume when it comes to books and television, movies, that sort of thing about ships, and just become more and more passionate about it as I grew up. Over the last sort of 15 years or so, that's translated into becoming an author, a maritime history lecturer. I work at, I've done presentations at maritime museums, at universities, on board the cruise ships, particularly with Cunard and P&O and soon to be Celebrity Cruises as well. And spent so much time on ships, literally have stopped counting how many cruises as well. But, the funny thing is that you and I met back in 2012 when you were hosting a show on LBC 97.3 over in the UK, and it was the QE2, which was our first ship. Both of us started our travelling history on the QE2, and we were talking about QE2 moving to London, and of course we'd never met before. And I'd done lots of interviews with other, radio hosts about passenger ships at that time. But for the first time, I think ever, speaking to you, there was someone on the other end who was really asking questions that were very, very much focused on ships and how ships worked and why the QE2 might be useful as a floating hotel. And since then, sort of formed a friendship. So I am always hearing from you about the different deals that you've got on the cruise lines. But what amazes me is how many times you keep changing your booking to get it lower and lower. And I didn't even know, because obviously I spend most of my time traveling as a guest speaker, I didn't even know you could do that. So I'm learning things from you.
I only just found out that you can only do that in the US and maybe other places, because I have family in the UK. My mum is an avid cruiser, and she also tried to, ring Royal Caribbean and change the booking because the price went down. And they were like, no, we don't do that. You have to be a US resident. So I'm obviously in the United States. You're in Australia.
Yes.
Even though it looks like we're sitting on the same deck of the same ship right now, this is actually a photograph I took on the maiden voyage of the Cunard Queen Anne, the maiden transatlantic crossing, which is
back in January, right?
In January 2025, which you and I would consider a maiden voyage because, my interest has always been Titanic.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting how a lot of people that you meet on cruise ships, they also love Titanic. They love the movie. And even though Titanic sunk, it still brings people on cruise ships.
It does.
It's probably worth us telling the story how the Queen Mary 2 came about, which was basically because of the movie, the James Cameron film in 1997, and Mickey Arison, who was the boss and still is the CEO of Carnival Cruise Lines, they just bought Cunard, and they were like, well, Titanic, the movie, is that popular. Why don't we build a another ocean liner, seeing as QE2 is shortly to be decommissioned. Did I get the story right? Is it kind of like that?
It's kind of like that, yeah. I mean, basically, Cunard, people might not realize this, but there's many times in Cunard's history where it almost all fell apart, right? Like with all companies that have been around for 185 years this year, there's been moments in history where it could have gone a very different way. And the 1990s were one of those kind of periods for Cunard. They'd really not been able to find a niche in the market the way that many of the new upstarts had been able to do. And in 1998, they were in dire straits, right? And people thought probably the brand would phase out. In fact, when I was on QE2 around about that time, I remember one of the senior officers telling me that like their goal is just to see the ship out because they just didn't know if there was going to be a future for the company. Now, of course, Titanic was released back in 97, but there was this massive surge in interest in ships and ocean liners and the romance of travel, despite obviously the tragic ending to that story. And Cunard was up for sale, and I think Mickey Arison really wanted to build an ocean liner. His father had bought old ocean liners and converted them into the first Carnival cruise ships, so they knew kind of about the ocean liners and the golden age of travel. And I think the story goes that he wanted the liner, but he needed the brand, and QE2 basically was the brand. And so they bought Cunard, built Queen Mary 2, called it Queen Mary 2 because QM2 and QE2 sounded so good as like sister ships, I suppose. And the rest, of course, is history. And that was the first ocean liner built in a generation. And today really is the only one built to ocean liner specifications that's still operating voyages, not just transatlantic crossings, but also
thanks
cruises.
to YouTube and social media, because of course, here on your channel, you put out videos all about the difference between a cruise ship and an ocean liner. I do think that people have started to book Queen Mary 2 knowing that they're doing a classic ocean liner crossing.
Yeah.
And that it's different, and the ship is a bit weird, and it's not similar to a cruise ship. And why is the buffet down on the promenade deck and not up on deck 12 and all this stuff? And we'll talk about that in the coming weeks on this show. But in the main, I think it's important that people understand that our heritage and our interest goes back to the days before the jet airliner travel. And so I should say that my dad used to work on the Queen Mary, the original ship that was built in 1936 and is now permanently moored in Long Beach, California. It's actually been in Long Beach longer than she was at sea, which is pretty sad in a way, isn't it?
And you spent quite a long time on board in Long Beach, haven't you?
Well, I'm lucky that I live nearby, that I can go and visit arguably the greatest ocean liner ever built any time. And if you go on a Tuesday and you're a resident, you'd actually get on for free, which is nice, because otherwise they rinse you just going on board. But they're restoring it. It's now under new ownership, new management, and the city actually took control of it because the last company let it go to ground a little bit. But they are restoring it so beautifully and authentically. And it is actually that link between Titanic. It's a ship built with rivets. Yes. Right? So it looks like Titanic from the outside, the way the panels are joined together, the way it has the enclosed promenade deck, all the things about it. I mean, it has 3 funnels instead of 4 funnels, but it has the similar scale to Titanic.
Actually,
it's double the size.
The film SOS Titanic, which was released in the 1970s, was filmed on board the Queen Mary because of those similarities. But then obviously if you know the ship and you know the Titanic, you can see it's not the right ship. But they do those scenes where they show the promenade deck, just as you're talking about, and it has that like link to the past that modern day cruise ships just don't have. And what's amazing about it is that the restoration means that you can go and stay on it. It's a hotel. You can stay in authentic cabins. Not like the QE2, which sadly, went to Dubai and has had a lot of its original cabins ripped out, and they just replaced them with white boxes because that's what the Dubai clientele want. They want a modern, clean lines. And I would never understand that. Like, why would you go on an old ship and want to stay in a modern room? Like, to me, it just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Some of those rooms are actually sold as vintage rooms, and when you look at the pictures, because I know QE2 very well, as you do, and the only thing that's vintage about that room is that they've left the 1994 marble bathrooms in, whereas everything else has been changed, and even the bathrooms were not the originals. So it is a shame, I think, with that. But Queen Mary, as you say, like so many aspects of it, you still got the hot, cold, salt, hot, cold, fresh taps in the bathrooms.
Yeah.
But your dad worked on board.
My dad worked in the Austin Reed store.
Oh, yes.
Which was the gentleman's outfitters. Because, of course, when you were on an Atlantic crossing, if you didn't have the right attire for formal nights, then you would obviously have to go and either rent or buy from the store. So my dad worked in the store. And that store is in the central atrium, which they call Piccadilly Circus.
Yes.
And has had a new linoleum put down, authentic, again, replacing what was there before that wasn't quite the kind of factual reproduction. So I have that history with him. And then when I was 6 months of age, I was the youngest passenger on QE2 going from Southampton to Tenerife and Madeira. And I was 6 months old, and I just got pushed around in a stroller basically for a couple of weeks. And then I went on it a second time as a child in 1983. I was 9.
Okay.
And I had this weird out-of-body experience. I don't know if I've told you this, but I felt like I knew the ship.
Oh.
And it must have been because I'd been pushed around this ship for 2 weeks as a baby, looking, and then I remembered it. I mean, this could be just me projecting, I don't know, but that's what it felt like. Anyway, so I became, as a 9-year-old boy, I became obsessed with the ship. I learned that it was 963 feet long and 105 feet wide, and I learned its draft and its speed, and I was really interested in the minutiae of QE2, as of course you are. And I think there's a lot of people who travelled on it. My grandmother would travel on it, so we would talk about it, and she would bring back all the memorabilia. Back in the olden days, the cruise lines would give you great memorabilia on special crossings and special voyages. And so I have this relationship with it. And so when they announced that Queen Mary 2 was coming out in 2000, or to be built and to come out in 2003, 2004, I booked the Maiden transatlantic crossing. And I booked it 2.5 years early.
Wow.
With my buddy. That's how long it took, right? Because it was, and I was so excited about that. It was like the most exciting thing to know that this new ocean liner was coming.
Wasn't it?
And of course, Cunard's maiden voyages these days, where did it go on its maiden voyage that wasn't the crossing?
Well, it went, it actually did, it was a crossing, but it wasn't a traditional crossing. I think Queen Mary 2
did Florida. It did a
Fort
Lauderdale.
Because Cunard's head office at the time was actually based in Miami.
Right.
So they brought it down to Florida. It didn't go to Miami. It went to Fort Lauderdale. And then it didn't go to New York, I don't think, until April. And it actually,
April 2004,
QE2 kept the flagship status until April, and then they did that tandem crossing together and then handed it over, almost like it was sort of bringing its new replacement home for the first time.
But so I was on that historic crossing in April 2004, and it was kind of historic. And of course, arriving into New York, you had that flotilla awaiting you, and it was like a replica of a poster that I had on my wall of the original Queen Mary in 1936 being welcomed with this flotilla. And I stood on the crow's nest, that section, I think that was below the crow's nest, below the bridge, that open deck. And I stood there as we came in and passed the Statue of Liberty, and of course it went to Pier 88 then, as opposed to now it goes to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And so we had the full experience, and then we discovered, how long later was it? Maybe 6 months later, that they were going to build another ship, the Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
And so all my buddies that we became friends with on the Maiden crossing, we said, well, let's do the Victoria. We'll do the Maiden crossing of that too. And so we did that. That was 2006? 2007,
Victoria,
right.
Yeah.
And then they announced Queen Elizabeth, and so we were like, let's do that too.
Did you do a farewell on QE2 before she left, by any chance?
Unfortunately not. No. I really regret that, actually. I didn't get to do that. But I did get to see her in the harbour with Queen Mary 2.
Sure.
And they left together. It was super
nice.
exciting watching. And I stayed in New York to watch the two ships leave from a friend's apartment in a high-rise looking straight down onto the harbour. And so then I did the Queen Elizabeth Maiden crossing too. And then here we are, bang up to date, 2025.
You did Anne as well.
Queen Anne, January, the Atlantic crossing. And I was sending you video of the crossing because the ship didn't handle the ocean particularly well, and we were having quite a lot of fun on board. And I was uploading, when I could, video to you that you were putting on the channel. And so this photograph behind us is a picture the day before we pulled into New York City.
It looks so calm compared to how it was a couple of days before, doesn't it?
Right? It looks so calm.
Actually, it's interesting because on your trip going westbound, and Anne was obviously having some challenges, very much cruise ship design in very rough seas, pretty big swells, I think, from memory.
No storms, though.
No,
so
it was just
the swells.
Yeah. And Queen Mary 2 was actually had left New York and was heading eastbound and was further north in worse weather. And Anne was a day late. And Mary got there on time.
That's right, because your friend Emma Cruises was on that trip, wasn't she?
She was, yes.
And she was vlogging from that. And then we should probably say that we are both big fans of the whole cruise vlog community.
Absolutely.
We watch everybody, and I'm obsessed. I watch everybody, and I'm a huge fan of, or even the ones that don't think that anyone's watching them, who don't get many views. I'm watching them. So
you send me probably about 4 or 5 clips a day. From different vloggers,
I love it.
Absolutely,
I love it.
Yeah,
I just love the joy and the passion. What I'm less interested in is the people who are obsessed with how many USB sockets there are next to the bed in the cabin.
Yes.
And because I think that can become a little tiresome. Because big deal. You know
I want to know about the ship, more about the ship. What's the experience?
Well, I want to know how people feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're a maritime historian, so you're kind of quite academic about it, and you get really into the numbers, whereas I get into the emotions. Yeah. I'm not saying you don't have emotions, Chris.
No,
I don't
of
want
course.
to devalue
Actually,
your
funny.
humanity.
One of the things that's most interesting, in this entire maritime history career that we've had, is that it started off with an obsession with the ship. Like you mentioned before, it was QE2 was just such an important ship for me. It actually started, funnily enough, for me with Titanic, similar to pretty much everyone, I imagine.
Right.
Before I even went on QE2, I read a book about Titanic at school, became mesmerized by Titanic, and then thought, well, what company did Carpathia come from? And looked up Cunard, and then this big fleet of these magnificent ocean liners. And it was very much about the machines. But as I've matured and as time has moved on, it's actually the human stories that become the most interesting part of the entire thing. And it's one of the amazing things about doing the lecturing, the live presentations, particularly when I first started out. So first time ever was on QE2 back in 2008, and then 2009, 2010 on the other Cunard ships as they were bringing them into service. Was the times that you would actually finish a presentation about Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary at war, and then somebody would come up to the front and talk to you, an elderly person who was literally there on the ships doing the trooping service. There's this photograph of the aft of Queen Elizabeth with something like 15,000 or so troops on the aft decks. And I've had a person who's come up and said he remembers that photograph being taken. Now, of course, tragically today, much of that generation has passed on. But when I first started doing these talks, they were sort of in their 80s and 90s. And to meet some of those people and to hear the stories and to kind of tap into that human emotion was so life-changing. And so it is sort of the magnificent machines, but it's also part of the human development. And really, if you think about it, the world we live in today without steam-powered passenger ships back in the 1840s just wouldn't exist the way it was. The 1840s, pre-Great Britain, pre-Brunel, pre-Cunard, you couldn't organize to go somewhere and come back on a schedule. It literally didn't exist to be able to say, I'm going to arrive on Wednesday the 23rd and I will be back in 3 weeks on this date. You just couldn't do it. And people just can't get their heads around that. You think, we get upset when there's a 20-minute delay on an airplane. But back then you could be waiting 4 weeks in port for the ship to be full enough for the captain to say it's worth going. And then you didn't know when you were going to arrive.
And it would also be extremely uncomfortable. That's the other thing that people forget. And it was the same with early air travel as well, before the jet airline age. It was hot, it was cold, or it was both.
Or it was below the it was below the clouds, so it was full of turbulence.
Right. It was noisy. It was nauseating. And of course, the ships were exactly the same. And that's why, when we talk about merchant sailors and, the rum and the anything to take your mind off of the fact that you're feeling completely violently ill all the time. And so
it's actually funny, Anthony. One of the short videos that I've done is about the difference in the luxury between QM2 and Titanic. And I get so much hate on that video. It's fascinating because people are having this sort of rant at me, I suppose, about you can't compare 1912 to 2025. But Titanic is always sort of, you see the film and you see the luxurious first class, and she was sailing on a still ocean and she wasn't moving much. And like the conditions were very, very good on the lead up to the night of the disaster, like very calm seas.
A mill pond.
Yes, exactly. But she was not stabilized. She was not air conditioned like throughout, like modern day ships. There wasn't plumbing in all of the cabins. There wasn't ensuite bathrooms in most. In third class, there was only a handful of bathrooms for thousands of people. And the point is that things have changed. And even though the finishings aren't, mahogany wood or whatever, you're probably more comfortable. And that's actually the point of the video. But I think there's a misunderstanding because people are so passionate about Titanic. It's not criticizing the past. It's just making people stop for a second and think, hang on a minute. Like, this was a totally different world. That society is totally different from today.
We romanticize it, don't we?
We do.
Because of the movies. And I mean, I love the old films, the Kenneth More version, from years ago. There are so many.
A Night to Remember.
A Night to Remember.
Yeah.
There are so many great movies. There's even a TV series version that I like with Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Yes. 1997's Titanic, I think, or
that was done the same year as the James
something like
Cameron
that. Very
movie.
close, yeah.
I just turned 50, as you know, and I know I look fantastic. So thank you, I appreciate that. But I went to Las Vegas to the Titanic artifact exhibition, and to see the big piece, which is the largest single piece of Titanic that has been salvaged, and it's about 30 feet wide, and it's a piece of the hull of the ship, and with the rivets still in place and the portholes still in place, and it was absolutely chilling to see it as it is. And now, of course, there's this new National Geographic documentary that dropped a few weeks ago that actually was to commemorate the another April 12th 1912 anniversary. And it's this 3D high definition photograph of the wreck that they've now been able to. So now you can actually get into the wreck without having to dive, and this has changed everything from a archaeological perspective, I guess.
Yes.
So we should say that we're not just going to be talking about ocean liners in the past, although that is obviously our interest and our hobby, and Chris has written a whole bunch of books on that stuff. But we also travel on cruise ships all year. And so I've traveled, I was trying to make a list. Obviously I've traveled on Cunard a lot, and I just did the maiden crossing of Queen Anne. But and I've been on all the Cunard ships. But I've also traveled on Princess. I've traveled on Norwegian Cruise Line. I've traveled on Carnival. I've traveled on Royal Caribbean. And now my kind of line of choice is celebrity cruises.
Yes.
So I will be bringing all of my experience as a passenger on these ships, and my experience of booking and how to get the deals and how to have the best time. And you got invited to the relaunch of a Carnival ship in Australia recently. You get to see see a really interesting kind of press side to it, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a big year in Australia with P&O Cruises had a sort of semi-independent operation in Australia that wasn't really linked with P&O UK anymore, but it was still owned by Carnival Corp. It had 3 ships, and this year they actually they said sunsetted, but basically shut it down. And two of those ships were actually moved across to Carnival. So we have this very interesting situation now where Carnival Cruise Line, which is one of the pioneers of modern day cruising, and it's funny because you talk about we talk about cruise ships, but they go all the way back to the 70s, and they actually made some massive changes to the way cruising was operated. But they've got these two ships that are Princess Cruises ships in their fleet that are completely different from the rest of the ships. And so it's the relaunch was amazing, and it's being there was very interesting. I actually got to meet a whole heap of Australian cruise vloggers, some of which I know you watch. But it's also like that connection to go, okay, well, this ship is now traveling with Carnival, but the reason why it looks the way it looks is because it was built for Princess before Carnival even owned Princess. It's quite interesting, actually.
Are you talking about like the shopping cart look as well?
Yeah,
on the back of the ship where it looks like you've got handles to push it through the supermarket.
Yeah. Actually, I was my first cut on that on those videos was very Australian, calling it a shopping trolley, and I had so many people asking me, "What's a trolley?" And then it's like, oh, the American audience calls it a cart. So
that's right.
Had to change it a little bit.
Different thing. And that's the other thing about the ships, isn't it? If you travel on Cunard or P&O, you're going to get British plug sockets, whereas if you travel on Carnival or NCL, you're invariably going to get European and US, American mainly. But the minutiae of travel is the thing that interests me the most. And I want to promote a website. We don't have anything to do with websites, but it's cruisedeckplans.com.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Because this is my kind of secret weapon for cross-referencing the deck plans, because they've done such a beautiful job of any photograph that gets sent in, and I think they pay people if they send in a picture.
Yep.
They put a link to the picture. They put a little clip on
so you
each
can see
cabin.
How clever.
And then if someone's made a YouTube video, a vlogger or something, then they put a little YouTube link on that cabin too. So you can actually see specific cabins in photographs and in video as you look around the deck plans. And so, because if you're booking a cruise and you're not doing your due diligence, firstly on the cruise line, like, does the line suit me? Is it, because if you're not going to go on a Carnival fun ship if you're not fun. and I don't like to have fun in the way they like to have fun, but I respect the fact that some people do. So, I think the only Carnival ship I did was the maiden voyage of the Carnival Splendor.
Okay. She's in Australia now. Yeah.
She's in Australia now, right?
Yeah.
But that brand just doesn't suit me. So you just have to find the brand that suits you. And I think that sometimes it takes a little bit of trial and error, maybe going on a few cruises that you had a nice time, but you're not quite sure why it doesn't work for you. And this is what's so great about this spectrum of different cruise lines.
Yeah.
Even though that 2/3 of them are owned by one company, it's like, is that they still manage, even though Carnival obviously own most of the lines, they still manage to make the brands different. And so knowing yourself, knowing who you are as a person is very important before you can, because this is more applicable to cruise ships than it is to aeroplanes. Because obviously, an airline, yes, you might like British Airways because you like the old school British service on the mixed fleet. But at the end of the day, the travel is, getting there is a few hours, and then that's fine. You put up with it. But getting on a cruise ship, the brand and the way the line operates and how they treat their passengers and meeting your expectations, if you're going to live with that for a week or 2 weeks, you really want to choose the right cruise line. And
yes, absolutely.
That's what I think we're going to focus on a lot in this new show.
Yeah.
Is provide some expertise, and by the time we finish with you, well, hopefully we won't finish with you, but by the time we get started, you will have some expert knowledge that means that you'll never have a bad cruise ever again. You'll mitigate all of the problems.
How to navigate them.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest developments of the cruising industry, is that back when, particularly when you went on your first QE2 cruise, but even in the 90s when I was on QE2 for the first time, there just wasn't the choice that there is now. And so cruising was very much considered to be this sort of thing that people did in their older age. And even though Carnival and Royal Caribbean and Norwegian had really established themselves in the American market, they hadn't gone international in the 90s. Now it's so much broader. There are so many different cruise ship options, there's many different brands, but there are also different types of ships, from the smallest expedition ships. I mean, here in Australia, we have these tiny little ships that go up into the gorges up near the Kimberley, but there's also ones that go to Galapagos. They do expedition trips to Antarctica, 100 or less passengers, these tiny little ships. That's worlds apart from an Icon class. And in between, you've got, your luxury yachts. You've got Windstar with its sail-powered ships, which is just remarkable. You have these super yachts like the Seabourn fleet and Silverseed, and there's ultra luxurious, which sort of sits in that market there where everything's included. And man, does it look amazing when you go. I've done tours of the Seabourn ships, and it just looks so good. And then, of course, there's the mid-size, but then there's mid-size for families. There's mid-size for people who want to have fun, as you say, and just want to have a casual trip. There's also mid-size for the luxury market, a little bit like P&O and like Cunard, P&O in the UK. And then you get up to the bigger brands that have some of these massive ships that have every amenity you can imagine, and even like a floating Central Park on the Icon and Oasis class. There's nothing about those two products that is remotely similar, other than they're on a hull that floats in the water. So you really do need to know what you're looking for and what you're interested in, just the same way that you would do that when you're looking at hotels or resorts. There's a very big difference between an eco resort and one that's pampering you with all of the latest trends and that sort of thing. Very, very different kinds of products. So the same thing exists in the cruise market now, where, even in the turn of the century, there just wasn't the choice that you have now in terms of that breadth of the market, but also the actual built form as well.
There's around 300 ships sailing.
Yes. Yep.
And they're building new ones all the time. And just when you thought, because that they're getting bigger, but in the process of getting bigger, they're having to kind of redesign them in a way, aren't they? To kind of make sure that everybody has an equally good time. And in fact, there's something on the Cruise Deck Plans website that is a space ratio number that it gives every ship, that I don't know if people know about or look at, that I think is really important. And so the average number is around between 28 and 32 in terms of how much of the gross tonnage of the ship, how much of that space is a public area that is usable based on the number of passengers who go on the ships.
Yep.
And interestingly, Queen Mary 2, as an example, is around 155,000 gross tons now. Since the upgrades, I think it was a little lighter than that when it first came to sea. But that ship has the largest space to passenger ratio out of all of them, because it only has about 2,500 passengers, and it could probably take maybe double that.
Well, don't give them any ideas.
No, well, they already added cabins. They added single cabins down on the lower deck, and they added some new cabins up on deck 13. Well, they created a deck 13. But even so, even with the new cabins, it still feels so big and spacious.
Yeah,
and
that's very true.
I love that feeling.
I think a lot of people, hopefully now cruise enthusiasts are getting to understand the gross tonnage measurement as a space volume measurement.
Right. It's not the weight of the ship.
No, and so many times in the media, it's like, she weighs, or she's, clocks in at, and it's a hard thing to get your head around.
It's displacement, isn't it?
It's actually different to displacement. It's as you said before, it's the internal volume of the ship that's dedicated to, like, enclosed internal volume. And there's actually a calculation. It's like 14 pages long or whatever to try and get this gross tonnage measurement. But it's a standardized measurement that lets you, it's a metric-based measurement, lets you measure across all of the different passenger ships, so you can make a realistic comparison in terms of the space on board the ship, or the volume on board the ship. And, Queen Mary 2, because she's built to do the transatlantic service, and she has to have that sort of raked and stepped up wedding cake kind of shape to her bow and stern. They can't bring that area to the front and fill it with accommodation. And then for the weight and balance, you've got these big spaces like the dining room, which causes some confusion around the movement of the ship throughout the ship, as you mentioned before. It gives her a lower passenger number for a ship that size. If that ship was built as a cruise ship on that gross tonnage,
Yeah.
and it was running for Carnival, it would have 5,000 passengers on board.
Yeah.
And that's why, as you say, it's such a remarkable ship, and it even exceeds some of the small luxury ships in terms of space ratios, because there's just so much space per passenger. You can feel a little bit like you're the only one on board sometimes, which can be a bit of a strange feeling on a ship that's so big.
I like that. I mean, some people like to be surrounded by lots of people,
Yeah.
and like Virgin Voyages, for example, is a new style ship. I have not been on it yet, but all the reviews and everything that I've watched and read is basically people saying it's very busy. Like, you can't get a reservation in a restaurant.
Yeah.
And I would hate to go on a cruise knowing that I wasn't going to be able to make use of all of the services, and I was having to compete with other passengers to try and get a dinner.
Yeah.
I would also say, though, that this space ratio number, which, as we say, is much higher on some ships than on others. For example, on the Celebrity Edge class, which is a fantastic ship, we'll talk about that next week.
Yes, love it.
Or the week after next, I think we're going to talk about that. But that ship, they extended it. So 2 ships came out first, the Edge and then the Apex, and that was a certain size. And then when the Beyond and the Ascent came out, they extended it. So they made room for the world-class bar, and they added some extra kind of roundel seating by the pool. So they extended it, but they also added a deck.
Right.
But what they didn't really do was change any of the public areas much more than that. So there's a whole extra level of passengers. So the passenger numbers increased significantly, but the public spaces kind of remained about the same.
About the same.
So if you look at the Edge and the Apex, they actually have a higher passenger to space ratio than the Beyond, the Ascent, and the New XL.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I think is worth talking about if you care, because I've realized, Chris, there's 2 types of people in this world. There's people that care, and there's people that don't care. and I am very much somebody who cares for the minutiae.
Yeah.
I have plenty of friends who don't care about anything. They're just like, I'll meet you there, and it'll be great.
Yeah.
And I can't do that. I have to know.
You have to know it all.
I look at photographs from every angle of a cabin before I book it. And I recently, because I was recently booking what was I booking? The Celebrity. It was one of I think it was the Infinity maybe, but I was looking at the distance between the foot of the bed and the wall where the television was. And I found, just through cross-referencing two or three different photographs, courtesy of Cruise Deck Plan's website, that one of the rooms had a small, and I could imagine myself turning sideways and trying to do that little shunt towards the balcony. And I was like, hang on a second. These are new cabins that they've slotted in here, and that one's on the end, and clearly they ran out of space for cabins, so they had to make one that was
slightly
maybe
smaller.
6 inches narrower than the others.
But you've also, through that process, you found some amazing cabins. I mean, I know you've managed to stumble across the extra special spacious cabins on Queen Anne.
Well, isn't this something that we should probably talk about? And that is
for sure.
Obviously, when they create a ship, if we use the Edge class as an example, this new kind of infinite veranda cabin is the new standard, right? So pretty much every cabin on that ship is identical.
Yeah.
I recommend getting one with the bed nearer the balcony. Because if you want to get dressed, because you can actually look on the plan, you see the cutout, and it'll actually show you where the cutout for the headboard of the bed is.
Sure.
And so this is very important minutiae, because if you get one where the bed is nearer the bathroom, the doors to the wardrobe can't open.
That was the cabin I had,
Right. And so you have to stand on the bed to get your stuff out of the wardrobe.
I just pushed the bed out the way, which is a bit invasive.
Right, but so by putting the bed down by the window, whether you have an ocean view or a balcony, it's irrelevant. By putting the bed down that end, it gives you more room to get changed for the evening.
Yeah, sure.
So because you've got the bathroom next to you, you've got a little bit more kind of getting ready space.
Yeah.
And again, this is stuff that I care about. I'm sure there's plenty of people that really wouldn't even notice. But this is the difference between having a good cruise and a slightly less good cruise for the same price.
I actually think there'll be a lot of people out there who who would notice once they're on board and kind of wished they'd known, which is why it makes a difference. Like I traveled, obviously beggars can't be choosers. When I was on board, it was a media event on Celebrity Edge. We were very fortunate to get such a nice room because guest lecturers don't usually travel like that. But it was, the bed was up against the doors. But, for me, I was just overjoyed that it had a serviceable bathroom because the showers on some of the cruise ship classes are so utterly abysmal.
Yes.
Tiny. I'm tall. I'm almost 2 meters tall. The shower heads, if they're fixed and they're like neck height, it's absolutely miserable. Yeah. And shower curtains should be phased out across all cruise ships tomorrow.
They stick to you.
They do.
Nobody likes the shower curtain.
And the Edge's bathrooms, the Edge class, where it has these big showers and tiled floors and that full-size mirror, it just feels like you're in a place that they've thought about, not just it's a space that's been kind of hastily put together at the last minute. And I think sometimes, Queen Anne's another good example. She's been introduced with bathrooms of a celebrity sort of style. You go back to the previous ships and look, of all the Cunard ships, Queen Mary 2 is my favourite by a good margin. But the bathrooms on Queen Anne put the Queen Mary 2's ones and Elizabeth and Victoria's to shame. So what do you do with that? Like if you're a traveller and those sorts of things are important to you, you can find your ships. But if you're a company like any of the cruise brands and you're bringing out new products, you have to start thinking about how do we retrofit the old ones. Celebrity's been very good at that in terms of refurbishing their previous ships. Other brands sort of try and allow it to sort of just exist as it was, but people who are traveling across different ships because they like the brand, they will notice those things.
Yeah. Well, Celebrity have redone the Summit and the Infinity, and they've edged them up. So they've created that, because that marble paneling that they use now on these ships in the bathrooms. It's not real marble. It's like a printed composite panel. Yeah. That material didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. I mean, they're doing it in homes now. You may see these ads on Instagram. We'll come and change your bathroom from this to this. Yeah. And the reason they can do it in a day is because these are panels that they literally cut with a saw.
It's like the flooring,
Yeah, and so there's no tiling, and so these materials, they actually use them in the buffet as well, the Ocean View Cafe and King's Court and stuff like that. These kind of fake marble panels, and I'm all for it because it does feel more luxurious. Yes, they're less likely to fade. They're not going to get grout issues or where you have to put a bit of filler in to try and prevent it from going moldy. And so they will stand the test of time. And these things, again, are the difference between having a good cruise. You don't want to, because a lot of these ships are 20, 25 years old. I mean, Queen Mary 2 is 20 years old, and it's got 20-year-old bathrooms. And you just have to, unless, of course, you book a cabin on deck 13.
Well, there we go, because those ones on 13, which were added during 2016 in Germany, actually. So there's a whole different sort of
so the ship was built in France, but the new cabins were added in Germany.
Yeah, they've got shower doors, they've got beautiful, and it's the same grade of Britannia balcony.
Club. It's Britannia Club.
Is it Britannia
balcony.
Club, is it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And the Ocean View single cabins with the big windows that used to be, I think it was the photo gallery maybe on that side. They also have those, the more stylized bathrooms because they were added during that refit. Right. Which is, interesting. And one of the other things that's really interesting, and actually Emma Cruises mentioned it in her video of her cabin experience on Queen Mary 2, is that because the ship was put into service in 2004 and because in 2004 Cunard's smoking policy was different to what it is now, there are actually built-in ashtrays in the bathrooms on Queen Mary 2.
I know,
and oddly enough, on the doors of the bathrooms, you might have noticed this, there's actually a bottle opener screwed to the door that you can use to open bottles of beer and stuff. Apparently that was a thing that ships built in French shipyards had added as like a standard. But the ones but the ones upstairs don't have it. The ones upstairs don't have it. So
that's so
and I guess in
interesting.
future refits, that sort of stuff might get changed, right? Because no one's smoking in their cabins anymore.
My friends just came back. She travelled for her 60th birthday on deck 13 forward.
Right. Yeah.
And she said these cabins are fantastic, but it's very high.
Yes.
Just think about how high that is, because the ship was never supposed to have cabins that high, and it is literally higher than the bridge, and it is so high. And so when you go out on your cabin, or on your balcony, I mean, if you're afraid of heights, you might want to... I personally favour the enclosed balconies on deck 3, 4 and 5.
The hull holes.
The hull holes, because you get much closer to the waterline.
Yeah.
And there's a bit more safety, because obviously, if you're doing an Atlantic crossing...
If you have any chance of getting seasick, you don't want to be on 13, because obviously as the ship moves, that's going to move a lot more. And that's one of the things you have to think about, is where in the ship do you want to be best positioned. Many people in my family who travel on cruise ships as well, they do suffer from motion sickness, and it's very much about choosing the right accommodation. Central, lower down. It might not be quite as glamorous as having the deck 13 with the beautiful view and the foam marble bathroom, but at least you're not going to feel as ill.
Well, this is it. Again, it's based on your itinerary. So if you're traveling an Atlantic crossing and you're going in November or January,
Sounds amazing.
At the end or the beginning of the season, you need to consider where your cabin's going to be. And so I just did the maiden crossing of Queen Anne. As you know, this background was photographed from on board. And I found a cabin that wasn't just midships, but it was an unusual cabin. And this is the other thing that I want us to really focus on during this series of this kind of expert cruise series, is try to pick the cabin that nobody knows exists, because it's invariably the cabin that they don't market.
Yeah.
And it's invariably one that doesn't appear in any of the advertising. It's not in the brochure. Yeah. It's also one that when you phone them up, if you're booking it online or on the phone, they never really know about. You can't they don't really talk to you about it, because they don't really have the experience. They can't stay in all the cabins.
No.
So
actually, some of the people like you who do all that research probably have more knowledge than many of the travel agents, because you spend so much time studying those deck plans, and it's like the same category as other cabins, but there's one or two outliers that are completely different to what those other cabins are, because maybe there's some piping that they couldn't get into the next one, so they had to make it a little bit longer or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've on every ship that I've been on, I've tried to book anomaly cabins. So like on the Edge class, for example, they have some ocean view cabins that are infinite veranda glass that doesn't open.
Oh.
And they're midships, and they're on deck 6, and there's only like 6 of them. And the cabin is 212 square feet as opposed to 201 square feet.
You said this was the Infinity.
It's the infinite veranda, but it doesn't open.
Oh, okay, sure.
Right?
Okay, that's interesting.
And which is quite good, because from the people that have been on the infinite veranda, getting that thing to open, waiting for that glass to come down takes so long, makes so much noise. If your partner's asleep in the bed, you can't wake them up.
It's funny, because it gets quite a lot of hate online. The infinite veranda. I think I was just so excited to have a cabin that was that kind of quality that I forgave it all its flaws.
I think they're fantastic, but I think people have an issue with the fact that the air conditioning goes off when the window is open and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And also it is nice to step outside, and obviously those cabins don't do that. But in a couple of weeks, when we talk about the Edge class and the Beyond, I've travelled on the Beyond in detail. I'm actually going on the Edge in a couple of weeks, so I'll have that experience to bring to the show as well. But the point that I want to make is that I really feel that if we can do any service on this show, is that we can advise people about the anomaly cabins that don't always present themselves in the booking process, where you're going to get so for example, I like to travel on the Navigator of the Seas, a Royal Caribbean ship, and I can book a suite, a 350 square foot suite for the price of an ocean view cabin, and there's only one available. And if I book it early enough, I get it. And I'm actually traveling on that ship twice this year. I've been on it 4 times previously. I got the suite once before, and I've got it again coming up.
So is that a non-marketed suite? Like it's a suite, but it hasn't been categorized?
Correct. It's a suite that is categorized as an ocean view cabin.
But you do realize that once you've told people this, you're never going to get it again.
I'll never get it again.
It's going to be booked out now, Anthony.
or Royal Caribbean will change the categorization.
What have you done?
But you basically get about 6 panoramic windows.
Yeah.
the whole width of the room. It's incredible. And so, you have to know about these in order to be able to book them and book them early, because obviously they sell. Listen, we don't have long left, but I want to talk about Queen Anne and the Maiden Crossing, because
yes, do, please,
I want to make
been
that
on
part
all three,
of this.
or four rather.
Having done all four, my most recent one is the one that's fresh in my memory, and so we might as well talk about it. And you and I were communicating throughout that trip, and it was very exciting. I flew from the US to London, drove down to Southampton, got straight on the ship. And isn't it funny when you do a transatlantic and you're living in the Americas, people can never understand why you would travel to Europe just to come straight back again. But this is the joy of a Cunard transatlantic. We should remind people that Cunard was kind of forced to merge with White Star Line, because White Star, after Titanic disaster, wasn't able to really get back on its feet. And so there was this merger that the government encouraged, and which is why now when you go on Cunard, they have a sub-brand of White Star Service.
Yeah. I mean, White Star was always positioned itself. It kind of, in the turn of the 20th century, it sort of stepped away from going for the speed record. Running a ship at very high speeds is extremely expensive. It actually becomes an exponential curve. So it's not good business sense to do that with every ship. Cunard obviously had that all tied up, so White Star went after this really luxurious market, which led to the Olympic class and led to Titanic. And of course, as you say, post-Titanic, they had Olympic, they got Majestic as war reparations, but could never really quite find that success that some of the other brands were able to achieve.
Well, especially if your best ship sunk on its maiden voyage. It's very hard to come back from that, isn't it?
And your current, your current next one it looks identical. It's very difficult. They obviously lost another of the Olympic class, the third one they lost during World War One. And as we got to the Great Depression, they just couldn't. They couldn't stand up really anymore. Cunard was struggling too, so as you say, the two merged. And it wasn't until all these years later that when Carnival acquired Cunard, that they reintroduced this White Star service and the White Star Academy, which teaches people the Cunard way, focusing in on that really high quality of personalised service as a nod to White Star Line.
Now, it would be nice if that was still the case, because I quizzed our waiter. We had the most wonderful waiter.
Yeah.
I won't say his name because I don't want to get him into trouble.
No.
But I said to him, he was great. And I said, how long have you been on the ships? And he said, well, I started on Queen Victoria, so I knew he'd been around since 2007, right?
Yeah.
So we got chatting, and I said, do you get trained? Like, do the new servers who come onto the ship, do they get trained in the White Star service? And he started laughing. He was like, no, they don't do any of that stuff anymore.
Goodness.
And it made me a little bit sad because, well, this is true. They still claim that it's White Star service. And I suppose, they do the march for the afternoon tea ceremony in the Queen's room, where they march down the sides to the music.
That was never a thing, though. That's a newer thing. Like on QE2, no one ever used to march down to music. It was, you would come in there and they would be mingling, the crew would be mingling with the passengers and creating a very personalised, very friendly atmosphere. I don't know when exactly it happened, but people started firstly queuing because there's too many people want to do the experience now. It's wonderful that it's still included in the fare, but then this whole parade is very new Cunard, not very old Cunard. Like, I'd never seen that before.
Well, maybe by not training people in the dining room, they just train people to march for the opening of the afternoon tea, and it gives the impression that there's some training at all. But, for me, the transatlantic, because of Titanic, because of the heritage of Cunard, because of Queen Mary, because of all of this stuff, it really means something. And to do it on a maiden crossing, the energy, like everyone is excited because it's never done it before. So there's that fear that it might not make it because the ship's not been tested in those waters. Hasn't been tested
on those conditions before,
Right? Yeah. And so this is something that I think is really interesting if you've never done a maiden crossing. And there's not that many opportunities to do it, of course, because Cunard really is the only one that kind of maintains the line of route with Queen Mary.
Route,
And of course, when Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth and now Queen Anne did it, none of those ships, two of them are Vista class, one of them is Pinnacle class. They're like flat bottom cruise boats. They're just not designed to cross the Atlantic, and so we knew on all of those crossings that it was going to be rough. We took our drugs. You can go down to the medical center and get a shot in the arse for $100 or whatever they charge these days, and which makes you a bit drowsy. I think the pills are a little bit better.
Back in the day, they used to just give you the pills at the purser's office. You didn't even need a prescription. It was crazy.
I think the pills are available down in the medical center now.
As well,
they're like in a bowl outside. Like you go down there, it's always closed, but there's always a bowl of pills.
Pills.
But it's so the actual crossing itself is a historic thing, and I'm so proud that I've managed to do all four.
Yeah.
Because it means that I can go on YouTube and I can search Queen Mary 2 arrival in New York, April 2004, and there's video from all along the Hudson that people have filmed of this moment. So I'm very proud of having done that with these same friends time and time again. But Queen Anne was a very interesting thing for me because, the last one I did was 2008, I think, Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, 2010.
So, 2010.
Yeah.
So that means I haven't been on a Cunard ship for 15 years.
Wow.
Now, that's not entirely true because I did a couple of crossings on Queen Mary 2 since, and I did a short Hamburg trip on Queen Mary 2. But I haven't experienced like new Cunard.
Yeah.
And obviously with Queen Anne, for some reason, Cunard decided not to lean into its heritage, but actually to try and emulate, I don't know, P&O or Celebrity maybe, and try and modernize the experience, which I personally think is a terrible mistake. And all the criticism of Queen Anne, obviously I can't complain about the fact that it's a pinnacle class and it's a high-density ship with way too many passengers for the space. But what I can say is that the Cunard as a company, they need to stop shying away from their heritage, because you can try too hard to appeal to a youthful audience. But I think that's where, when you do market research, it can sometimes fail you because actually young people love the history and the heritage
and the authentic experience, right?
And the
funny thing is, and the thing that because people who've been on my channel before will know I was sort of a little bit involved with Queen Anne's.
That's right.
The shipyard.
I did some of the suites.
Yes, Rochelle and I we were worked with Cunard to identify the theme for the suites, which was named after iconic waterways that are important in Cunard's history, and then we suggested the 6 names and wrote a story about each one. And I think also I did a shipyard tour, so the ship's I'm very fond of the ship. But I think one of the things is that if you know what you're looking for on Queen Anne. And I did a video about this as well. It's up on the channel. There's a whole heap of things on Queen Anne that are nods to its past, but they haven't told anyone. There's no plaques anywhere. There's no heritage tour. So you walk into the 1840 room, for example, and people think it's a casino with a funny name. They don't realize it's 1840 because that's when the first voyages were taking place. So you go into Bright Lights and they think it's just, because of the lights on the roof, but they don't realize that it's named that because Cunard Servia was the first Cunard ship to carry electricity. It had all these light bulbs throughout the ship. So I've actually said to Cunard, I've contacted them and told them, I'll write them for you. Put some plaques up so that people know. Like, you don't have to go full Queen Mary 2 on this ship. Put some maritime posters or pictures in the elevator lobbies. There's space. There's literally blue walls. There's space for it. And just a few little tweaks here and there will make that ship so much more part of the family without making her a replica of what's happened in the past. I get you have to modernize. But as you say, I think if you lean into your unique brand position and do things like, I know this is boring stuff for us, but put proper USB in, fix the Wi-Fi so it works well throughout. You're going to get the youth market if those things are tied up and it's an authentic experience. Because I don't think people want sort of a wishy-washy experience. They want to be wowed by this experience. It needs to be something you walk on board.
It's fear on behalf of the management. There is the fear that if we are too much of a heritage brand, that we're going to scare people off. And I would say that's a false economy. For example, I stayed recently at the TWA Hotel at JFK,
yes,
which is arguably one of the greatest architectural buildings in history. It was commissioned by Howard Hughes.
Yes.
It's, they spent like nearly $1 billion renovating it. They built 2 hotel blocks either side, but the main kind of 1960s
the terminal's
building,
still there. Yeah.
They renovated it so authentically, and it is such a throwback to exactly how it was in the 1960s. And if you walk around there, everyone there is young. Mm-hmm. They're Instagramming everything. Mm-hmm. They're reading the history and the heritage. They're looking at the old uniforms that are on the models. Yeah. And they are really immersing themselves.
Yeah.
And they have an old Constellation airplane out back that has a bar on board as well. But my point is that they have leaned into the heritage, and that's why it is so successful.
Actually, in the 94 refit of QE2, one of the greatest things they did, and look, Trafalgar House, which was running it at Cunard at the time, they went on after that to make some pretty big mistakes with the brand, but one of the greatest things they did with QE2 is they took this ship, and she was like a 1960s platform, and they kind of updated it to meet the expectations, but they introduced the Heritage Trail. And the Heritage Trail on the ship was authentic, real pieces of heritage from the past fleet. Now, it was in beautiful cabinets. It was built in. You could do a self-guided, or you could do a guided tour with a guide, taking you through, and you'd see like artifacts from Mauritania and Lusitania and Queen Mary, and they'd have the Boston Cup and all these things and models of ships everywhere. And it was those sorts of things that, if you think about, like, you've got this ship now, all 4 of them actually. Queen Mary 2's got some. But you bring some of that stuff in. It doesn't massively need to change the architecture of the ship, but just bring in some real items from the Cunard archives. And that's where you're going to get people standing there and Instagramming it and doing it's just going to be, the platform is there. You could just improve it, right?
I noticed that the merch store on board Queen Anne was tiny, the smallest little shop. And that to me suggested that they weren't particularly proud of selling Cunard as a brand. Now, Cunard is as iconic as TWA.
Oh, for sure.
That phrase, getting there is half the fun. All of that stuff.
Oh, imagine that on a T-shirt. What a great idea.
Leaning into, right. And you and I, we both do consultancy for brands.
Yeah.
And this is free consultancy that we're offering now. But, Cunard made a mistake with Queen Anne in as much as they panicked. And I feel like because the people that are running it now are not as nerdy as we are about ships, there is a respect for it, but they don't quite understand that there is enough of a market that wants the authentic Titanic experience. And you can get that on Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria, because of the wood panels and that feeling. They did try and do that in a kind of Edwardian or Victorian style. But Queen Anne, by contemporizing it, to me, it's not one thing or the other.
I think with Queen Anne, like, I actually feel that you can take the ship and make the ship's interior different from the others. I don't think that Cunard necessarily has to be the wood paneling of the 1930s, because obviously QE2 was a huge departure from that in the 1960s. Right. Cunard Countess, Cunard Princess were completely different. So if you go through history, there's all sorts of different styles. So I'm more comfortable with the idea of Queen Anne being a bit of an outlier in terms of her.
I liked the ship, and I liked the design. I didn't have a problem with any of it, and I loved the pool club, and I thought it was beautiful. But I think that it's more about the fact that it was all a bit of a secret. That it was like a Cunard ship.
Yeah.
And, having the paintings of the ships on the other 3 ships and being proud of the history is all you have to do.
Yeah, for sure.
And there was none of that on this ship.
No,
none
I totally
of it
agree.
at all. And people were crying out for it. And on Cunard, you need some staples. You need a good Golden Lion pub, and they have a good Golden Lion pub. You got to have a nice chart room. Well, they didn't quite do a chart room. They've done like a corridor with a bar at one end. For me, the chart room doesn't quite work. But most importantly, you got to have a good Queen's room.
Yeah.
And sadly, they didn't commit to the Queen's room. And it made me realize that, the Vista class is such a perfect ship for Cunard. It has a promenade deck. It has a perfect space for the Queen's room. We're talking about the ships that are Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria.
The 2 Cunard ones, yeah.
The 2 Cunard ones, that because it's an off-the-peg ship. You know,
Well,
the shipyard builds you a
that's it.
Vista-class ship. But it's a perfect ship for Cunard. But the Pinnacle class, which you can find on Holland America as well, it's not really a Cunard ship. It doesn't have the promenade deck.
Yeah.
Well, it does, but you're looking at lifeboats.
Yeah.
And it's very, very narrow, like so narrow in places. On the North Atlantic, I thought I was going to flip over the side.
You know the story about the first Queen Victoria, right? So Cunard...
That's right. They switched them, didn't they?
Yeah,
a little bit like
Cunard
Titanic
first,
and Olympic.
They first announced Queen Victoria, and they started building Queen Victoria, and they did the coin-laying ceremony for Queen Victoria, and then Queen Mary 2 was such a success, and she had things like a Queen's Room, and she was doing transatlantic crossings, and QE2 was getting old, and so they actually transferred Queen Victoria to P&O UK, renamed it Arcadia, and then built a new Queen Victoria, but they modified the Vista class. They lengthened it to put the space in for the Queen's Room, because the traditional class doesn't have that big Queen's Room space.
Right.
And they actually changed the shape slightly and reinforced the bow to not make it an ocean liner, but to make it more suitable for the transatlantic crossing. So Cunard's been here before. They've been in a situation before where they were building a cruise ship that was contemporary and was going to be completely different from previous Cunard, and then they looked at it and reassessed and modified their plans. I think the Pinnacle class, to your point, because it hasn't been modified like as a platform so much to enable those Cunard spaces, they really are working with the space that they had. The bow is the traditional Pinnacle class bow. The central part of the ship's a traditional Pinnacle class central core. And so that's why I think you see that such a big difference between the Elizabeth and Victoria and Queen Anne in terms of how that flow works, because they literally went back to the drawing board with this class of ships. I'm a menace with this microphone, but this class of ships, and then reimagined how they could do it. And so if they were to build a fifth, I think that's probably what they would need to do to sort of bridge that gap between cruise ship and the traditional Cunard spaces. That
it needs to be. They need to do something to it, because let's be honest, an off the peg cruise ship just will never work for Cunard. Cunard has too many requirements. And so to take one off the rack from the shipyard, as they've done with this Pinnacle class Queen Anne, is kind of where it lets itself down. And also, and I don't want to speak ill of the brand, because I'm a huge fan of Cunard for so many reasons, but everything just felt like it was done in a bit of a hurry. I think they built that ship in record time. And so,
well, they had a lot of delays because of the pandemic as well. Like all shipyards were really struggling.
My original booking for the Maiden crossing was cancelled, and we were refunded.
Of course, yeah.
And then we had to rebook this new one. But even on the Maiden crossing, like, things were peeling, things were breaking, things were smashing. Nothing was glued. Like, all of the panels on Queen Elizabeth and Queen Victoria were like thick wooden bespoke panels. And here they were like vinyl wraps.
Like
you've got
some pictures of that.
I have some pictures of it peeling off, and the glue, you can see where they squirted the glue. And so it was just things like that are a little disappointing, because to me it was a ship that was built in a bit of a hurry. The design is great in most places, but if they're going to do anything in the short term, just change that carpet in the Queen's Room, and it will make such a difference. But if you want to talk about minutiae, there's like a vibe in the Queen's Room, a classic Cunard vibe that is so styling and vibing when it comes to ballroom dancing and dancing generally. And it just didn't really happen on Queen Anne. And most people are like, oh, it's because the room, the carpet's terrible, or there's not enough chairs. But for me, as somebody who has experience in these rooms, I could tell that it was because the stage wasn't big enough for a proper band with floor monitoring.
Right.
And so the band needs to be able to hear itself and also hear the audience in order to vibe with the audience. And so because the stage is so small, they're all having to wear these new in-ear monitors, which means that they can hear themselves and they can hear the band leader, who happened to be the trumpet player, and he would talk into a mic that was connected to all the musicians' ears. And so it was like they were performing in a studio.
Right.
But they weren't actually performing in the Queen's Room. So they weren't able to connect with the audience. And then if you were on the upper level, there was no speakers. So all you got was the sound of the drums coming up through the hole. And you couldn't hear any vocals because again, the stage was so small, there was no speakers around the outside of the stage. So that meant that they had to put all the vocals from the singers' microphones coming out of speakers at the back of the Queen's room.
Yeah.
So it meant that you can hear the instruments coming from the front, but you can hear the vocals coming from the back. And if you're upstairs, you can only hear the drums.
Yeah.
Now, this might sound like I'm being picky, but if you truly understand how to create a vibe for entertainment and production purposes, you need to know that the mix is really important, and the ability for the musicians to be able to hear the crowd and change their set list depending on what the audience wants. And I just felt like there was a giant iron curtain between the performers and the passengers.
Yeah.
Not guests. Notice I don't call
passengers.
them guests.
No, neither do I.
Passengers. Because if they're guests, they should be sailing for free.
What I will say, though, about the Queen Anne design is that there's certain spaces on board which I think are the best that Cunard's got. Like the pavilion. I just loved that space. Absolutely loved it. That massive height that the curved roof gives, but also that they've brought in restaurants into that space so it feels a bit more alive than it does on many of the other ships.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I thought was quite nice is the area where you walk around. There's sort of the shops on one side, and there's the Corinthia Lounge, and it's quite long and it sort of sprawls out. That was had quite a nice energy and quite a nice vibe to it as well. And of all the Cunard ships, the bathrooms in this one is the best, as we mentioned before.
Right.
Yeah.
No, there were definitely some advantages. The only thing I didn't like about the pavilion was I don't like to eat in a room that smells of chlorine.
Yeah, sure.
And because we were on a crossing, the roof wasn't open.
Sure.
And so I was like eating breakfast in that wellness cafe, and I was like, all I can really smell is the pool. But
we're such a swimming culture over here in Australia. I'm probably used to it.
Yeah, you're probably used to it. So I want to just, because we have to finish in a second, but I want to talk about these anomaly cabins. Now, like I said, on a crossing, I like to be low and midships where possible. And originally, the other thing is, I also like to pay for something like a transatlantic crossing. I like to, I really like to just pay as little as possible, because I'm the kind of person that I can find joy in anything.
Yeah.
I can find absolute joy. So just get me on the ship. Even put me in a crew cabin if necessary. I know how to have fun.
You should start doing guest lecturing.
I would love to do guest lecturing, and that I'm sure is in our future. Maybe we could do a joint one. But I very much feel like just getting on board is all that matters, because if you know anything about cruises and travel, you really don't spend that much time in your cabin.
Yeah.
And there are people who only book inside cabins, and you should remember that an inside cabin can be half the price of a balcony cabin, or even less.
Sometimes though, you, as you say, you find these anomalies. I know a few on the Vista class that are significantly larger than their Ocean View counterparts. Like, they are big cabins. Yeah.
So initially, I booked a midship deck 4 balcony cabin, a standard. I think it was an obstructed balcony cabin. I think they call it DB. And again, you want to find one that's between the lifeboats. And if you go on cruisedeckplans.com, they actually show you on some ships the view out of the window. I think Queen Elizabeth is pretty much mapped all the way down one side now, so you can see exactly what view you get out of your balcony. And I've always opted for an obstructed balcony. I think that's a perfect cabin, because if you choose the right one, it's not that obstructed, and you make quite a saving. So I was initially in one of those, but as you said at the beginning of the show, when I booked it was so far out that the prices were quite high. And so I have these alerts set up on a website called Cruise Line, and it was sending me alerts that the price was going down. I was like, this is ridiculous. So unlike with Royal Caribbean or Celebrity, who will just reduce the fare, Cunard have to unbook you and rebook you.
Really?
And so,
Oh,
so
okay.
every time I was doing it, I was having to move cabins. So I was kind of moving around deck 4 midship.
I bet you they love it when you call.
Oh, they love it. They're like, uh-oh, not this guy again. He's trying to pay less.
He's back.
So eventually, obviously, we're running out of cabins now because the ship's filling up, and I'm still trying to get the price down. And initially, I think I saved, because of the 4 times I rebooked this trip, I think I saved around $1,000 by doing this. You know, so it was worth it.
Yeah.
But eventually they said, okay, we've only got 2 cabins left. You can either have, I think it was 4072, which was on the port side, which was was fine. You know, again, an obstructed balcony. Yeah. Or you can have 4060 or 4060 or 4058. And I had a look at the plan, and I saw that the cabin, instead of it being that way, was this way. And it meant that the balcony was 18 feet long.
Amazing.
For a regular, like, obstructed balcony view.
Yeah.
And I was like, hang on a second. What's the catch? There's got to be a catch. So I look at it, and I discover that instead of it being the standard size, I think the standard size on those cabins is, I'm trying to remember the square footage. I think it's something like 180 square feet on the standard balcony cabins. But on this one, 180 feet, and the balcony's 48 feet. On this one, the cabin was around 268 square feet, and the balcony was like 75 feet or something.
Yeah. And that's that thing where there's some reason why they've had to turn the cabin that way,
right,
to allow for piping or services to go down. I actually saw one of them at the shipyard when the ship was being built, and the lead of our who was briefing us, he actually pointed it out and said there's a few special ones dotted about the ship, but because of course everything was open, you could see all these massive pipes and cables and stuff, because they need to run it through, just like when you're on a plane and there's a window missing because of all the wiring and stuff's going there.
Right.
And if you know to look, you're going to get this delightful room. It's probably better than all the others, even in the configuration.
Well, I had friends who were up in the Queen's Grill, and they had exactly the same size cabin.
Yeah.
The only difference was they had a much bigger bathroom behind it, and they had a wall in the middle with a TV on each side.
Yeah.
But this cabin, I was in 4060, deck 4. It was also on its own in the corridor. There was nothing opposite it, and there was nothing either side of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was on a bend. It was fantastic. And there was no obstruction. That was the other thing. There was just no obstruction.
You found it.
So 4060, 4061, they're really the best cabins to get. If you go to 4058 and 4059, they have a bit of an overhang from deck 5, and the same with 4056 and 4057, I think.
Yeah.
So that's just a little tip-off that if you're going on Queen Anne, you don't need to spend an awful lot of money to be upstairs, and low midship is obviously very helpful, but find the anomaly cabins, because every ship has maybe a dozen anomaly cabins, and it's often a much more fun experience, especially if you're traveling with friends and you're like, oh, come and see our cabin. My friends who'd paid 3 times what I'd paid upstairs, they came in and they were like, oh, it's kind of like our cabin. And I was like, yeah. So Did you have the price tag just lying there on the table so they could see, I left it on the door outside. Never mind the pineapple. I just put the price of the trip on the door. The only thing it was missing was a sofa. It had a large chair and a table.
Probably because
there was actually nowhere to put the sofa.
Yeah.
But that really didn't matter. I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever sat on the sofa in a cruise cabin.
Well, I mean, if you got a balcony, you wouldn't need it, would you, really?
Yeah, exactly. And so we got to use the balcony for the first few days before the weather got bad. And then, obviously, for the arrival into New York, they get into New York earlier and earlier and earlier. It used to be 6 a.m. Now it's like 4:30.
Yeah, it's a shame.
And so nobody wants to get up at that time. So this is an advantage of having a balcony, is that we just like wrapped ourselves over our pajamas and went out onto our own balcony and filmed the Statue of Liberty and then got back into bed. Yeah.
Of the Statue of Liberty, yeah.
It's so interesting, isn't it, how you can make a ship and a trip work for you. And I would always say with all of these trips, and we're going to talk more about this in coming episodes, but, there's a lot of upsell these days with cruise lines. They sometimes advertise a low fare, but by the time you've added Wi-Fi and you've added drinks and you've added excursions, you can be spending double what you'd planned. Yeah. And the way that I like to travel is I don't like to spend a cent more than I prepaid before when I booked, apart from gratuities. So we'll talk about how to go about that and how there are ways and means, using speciality dining and all other, it's actually cheaper to eat in speciality dining every night than it is to book Queen's Grill.
Yeah, right.
Think about that for a second.
And the other one that's interesting is that so many of so what I found fascinating just from a local perspective is that the P&O ships that went across to Carnival, they had the standard restaurant, I suppose, which was the waterfront, and then the other main dining room on the Grand Class was converted into two smaller dining rooms. There was Angelo's and Dragon Lady, so Italian and Asian cuisine, and those were with P&O were complimentary, and it's the same with Carnival. So you have actually three very unique, very different dining rooms that are complimentary. Then upstairs they've got like the Italian restaurant that is a paid restaurant where you can get Italian food, but you can get it free at Angelo's every night on board the ship. You just got to make a reservation because they're smaller restaurants. But it just amazes me to think that like that exists and they'll both be full. But why are they both full? Because the one downstairs is great and it is literally covered in your cruise fare. So yeah, there's a few little things.
It's like the people that say, "Oh, well, I want a really good steak, so I'm going to go to the steakhouse." And my advice is, we'll go to the regular restaurant, the MDR, main dining room, and if the steak they give you is not good enough, send it back and ask for a better steak.
Better steak, yeah.
Keep doing that until you get one that's as good as the one in the paid dining room. Because I don't know, I just feel like, I don't want people to feel that they can't travel well in a luxurious environment and be priced out. I believe that cruising should be for everybody. It's a little bit like the theatre. I love the theatre, but I'm not paying $250 a ticket. I'm just not doing it. I won't do it. It's just not worth it.
Fair enough.
And it's the same with cruising. It's like, how much is it actually worth?
Yeah.
And if you're taking a week's cruise somewhere, you really have to ask yourself, what is it worth? And, my mum used to work to this value of £100 a day. That's how much a cruise should cost, £100 a day per person. And so $130 a day, for example, in US. And if you can find a cruise that's that price, that is how you know that you're paying the right price for a cruise. Obviously, gratuities are on top and you might like drinks, but unless you drink 13 drinks a day, a drinks package is never worth it.
I know. I've looked at the drinks packages just out of interest, and I think to myself, you must have to drink an awful lot to make that actually worth it with the prices. Like, honestly, I mean, obviously it suits some people, but even the coffee packages they try and sell you on board, and you're like...
But you can get free coffee. Like, if you know where to go, like on Celebrity, if you go to the Spa Cafe, they have a proper coffee machine in there.
Really?
That's better than in the MDR.
Yeah. Well, QM2 is the same. At the front of the ship in Connections, there's actually like they're like the airport lounge DIY coffee machines.
That's right.
But you can get it there as opposed to paying for it upstairs.
So you just have to get to know the ships and get to know the tips and the tricks. And one thing I want to point out, because we need to wrap up.
Yeah.
And that is that you and I have been able to do this show and talk in this detail with no supportive written material.
Yes.
Right? The only written material I got up was the deck plan on deck 4 of Queen Anne to remind myself of the cabin numbers
exactly.
that were around my cabin. But other than that, this is how much we care. This is how much attention to detail we seek to share.
Yep.
And I just hope that a combination of this show and the conversations that we have as well as what you'll watch on other people's channels when they do vlogs, when they go traveling. And if you combine that knowledge, it will give you the opportunity to have really brilliant cruises, because there is nothing better than being at sea for
Absolutely.
a vacation.
I totally
that's
agree.
how I feel.
Yeah.
My life is on land. I would rather not go out on land, and we don't go out much, if at all. But if we can go on a cruise every 3 months, save the money that we didn't spend in restaurants and bars and going out, and just spend it on a cruise for £100 a day or $130 a day, then you really have got yourself a very nice life.
Yeah.
But it needs to be accessible. So part of this show is making cruising accessible, making it affordable, and channeling as much joy and pleasure. Because I can find joy in anything. And even though Queen Anne was not a great ship, I mean, that thing creaked quite a lot on the North Atlantic, I had the most fantastic time. I don't think I've had so much fun on a ship since, 2004 on Queen Mary 2.
If you're not feeling terribly seasick, and I completely empathize to people who do, but if you're not, and you get some, for people who feel well regardless of the weather, and you get some movement, you hear the ship making its noises, and the atmosphere sort of changes a little bit as well, and people start to sort of talk about it and want to go exploring together. And 2019 rather, on Queen Mary 2 coming across the Atlantic, we were hit by very rough winds and rough seas, and we had bow waves going over, and just met this group of people in the front of the ship in the Commodore Club, and we were all watching together as the sun rose. And these are friends you've kept forever. And that's one of the things that's also like amazing about cruising, is once you're there and you're on board and the ship pulls away from the pier, I mean, I don't exactly know what it's like on the Icon class, but people do tend to sort of come together. You start to meet people from other parts of the world that you wouldn't otherwise have met. You have conversations with people who might have completely different backgrounds or political beliefs to you. And that all sort of fades away a little bit at sea, I find. It's one of the only places that I've noticed in modern society.
You come together because you don't want to die. It's like we're on a cruise and I don't want it to sink and I want to have a really good time, and so your shipmates kind of become your family. And it's like a shared experience. And I do feel that humanity, especially as crazy as the world is these days, we need to hold on to these moments.
Yes.
And so do a transatlantic crossing on Queen Mary 2. Like, if you haven't done it, you must do it. But you don't need to pay the advertised fare. They drop that thing down to $699 when they can't fill it. Just wait and book it for that and get an inside cabin and don't worry about it. I really feel like these experiences are the things that we were meant to have. And this planet is a water planet.
Yes.
It's not a land planet.
Yes.
We are mostly water and we don't use it. And whilst I know you do too, we have our own opinions about the environmental issues associated with cruises.
Yes.
And
people will know that from my channel too, like very much believe that more needs to be done to improve, but we're on a journey.
And it's getting better with these gas powered ships and things, but ultimately, you can reduce your carbon footprint by flying less and taking a cruise and really making the very most of it. It's really, really, really good fun. And for the people, I'm always surprised I meet people and they're like, "Oh, I've never done a cruise." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Because I know for my money that if I was to go out for dinner 3 times a day, like eat breakfast out, eat lunch out, eat dinner out, and do afternoon tea out, and go to a show at night, and then go to a bar and see entertainment all day, and go to a spa and swim. That would probably cost me on land. It would probably cost me about $1,500 a day. And I can do it on a cruise for $130. And that's the other thing for me, is like, you cannot get that experience on land anymore. It is simply too elitist. It's too expensive. And so, we are lucky that the cruise ships, because there are so many of them, offer the type of vacation that we would want We just need to know which one we need.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's what we're here for, is to try and identify what it is that you need.
Which of the 300 cruise ships is for you?
Exactly. All of them, in my case. Chris, thank you for your expertise.
Oh, no, thank you. This is fun.
I enjoy you enormously, and I look forward to doing this again next week. Every week, different ships, different experiences. If you have any ideas for things that you want us to talk about, or you have questions, please put them down in the comments below, and we'll, next week we'll kind of come in and reference your questions.
That'll be fun.
And I really enjoyed myself. I think, we should definitely do this again. So
I think so.
Join us next week on the Expert Cruise Show. For now,
bye-bye.
happy sailing.
Happy sailing. See you on board.